The deep core mining operation of Kinhold Karghul was a symphony of grinding adamantium and the groaning protests of a planet being hollowed out. For 3 millennia, the kin, stout and unyielding, had delved into the forgotten world of Xylos Prime. A once verdant world, long since stripped of its atmosphere by solar flares and repurposed as a vast orbital resource extraction platform during humanity's golden age, Xylos Prime was now a pockmarked husk, its surface blasted by cosmic winds, and its crust a maze of ancient, collapsed tunnels and unimaginable geological pressures. Below this desolate exterior lay the true wealth, the promise of rare minerals, exotic xenocrystals, and the legendary, highly coveted void iron, a material of such strength and density that kin legends claimed it could hold the very fabric of space together. Karghul was no small kinhold. Its ancestor core, the unwavering gaze, had guided generations of kin, its vast data stacks holding the accumulated wisdom and grudges of countless millennia. From its central nexus, deep beneath the planetary mantle, the Votan directed the tireless excavation, its algorithms predicting geological shifts, optimizing energy output for colossal plasma drills, and managing the delicate balance of life support for the hundreds of thousands of kin who called the colossal subterranean complex home. Every kin was a cog in this colossal machine, a specialist in their field, driven by the ceaseless pursuit of resources and the preservation of their lineage. It was in the abyssal maw sector, nearly 1,000 kilometers below the surface, that the anomaly was first detected. For centuries, the maw had been Karghul's most ambitious project, a multi-fronted assault on the planet's deepest geological strata, fueled by tantalizing sensor readings that hinted at an unprecedented concentration of void iron. The pressures here were titanic, enough to crush even the most hardened ferrocrete to dust, and temperatures soared to infernal levels, requiring complex Votan-designed cooling systems and specialized mining rigs piloted by Brokir iron masters whose suits were more starship than armor. The anomaly wasn't a void, a fissure, or a pocket of superheated gas. It was nothing, or rather, a region of absolute, sterile nullity that defied all geological models. Gravity sensors warped, seismic resonance readings dissolved into static, and the very rock, when core samples were reluctantly extracted, seemed to possess properties that shifted under analysis. It was too uniform, too perfect, an impossible sphere of non-rock embedded within the planet's turbulent, molten heart. A Thetling Thunder Korn, commander of the Abyssal Maw operation, and a kin of formidable reputation forged in asteroid fields and Xenos skirmishes, had initially dismissed the reports as sensor ghosting. His ancestor markings, a complex network of runic scars etched onto his bionic arm, pulsed faintly with the effort of deciphering the raw data feed. The Votan, the unwavering gaze, had a different perspective. Its warnings, usually reserved for impending structural collapses or critical energy fluctuations, began to grow more insistent, more abstract. Data incongruity, non-Euclidean spatial flux, chronal drift detected, origin unknown, ontological irregularity, precautionary protocols initiated. Such pronouncements from the ancestor core were rare, reserved for phenomena that truly defied the kin's vast repositories of knowledge. Another phantom, thunder, grumbled Grimoire Stonefist, a grizzled hearthkin warden with a grav cannon almost as old as he was. They stood on a reinforced observation platform, a sheer drop of kilometers beneath them, leading into the glowing red abyss of the primary borehole. The air hummed with contained energy, a palpable weight on the lungs. My hearthkin are tired of chasing shadows. We are miners, not ghost hunters. The Votan doesn't chase shadows, Grimoire, Thondur replied, his voice a low rumble, amplified by his heavy void suit. He pointed a gloved finger at a holographic projection shimmering before them. It displayed the planet's internal structure, a vast, intricate web of kin tunnels. But the anomalous stratum was a perfectly smooth, dark pearl embedded within the crimson and ochre layers of magma and rock. This isn't a shadow. It's a wall that shouldn't exist. The decision was made after consultation with the ancestor core and the Kargul's Council of Elders to proceed with extreme caution. The lure of void iron, even if potentially hidden behind a perplexing barrier, was too great to abandon. If this wall was an ancient Xenos construction, it might contain hitherto unknown technologies or resources. The pragmatic kin did not shy from the unknown. They approached it with sturdy drills and comprehensive salvage protocols. Brokir iron masters, revered artisans of technology and masters of the forge, were dispatched with their most advanced mold drills and scanner arrays. These were not the standard mining drills, but specialized geological probes, capable of analyzing matter at a subatomic level. For weeks, the probes pushed against the anomaly. They reported no resistance, no detectable mass, yet they could not penetrate it. It was as if their physical presence was simply ignored. It wasn't a force field. It was a non-space, a localized unreality. Then, one cycle, the impossibility shattered. A scout probe piloted by a daring young Iron Master named Kale, pushed deeper than any before it, its multispectral sensors screaming at the Votan's ancestor core with a torrent of contradictory data. Kael, frustrated by the lack of progress, had overridden several safety protocols, believing the Votan's caution was an impediment. He activated a rarely used subharmonic resonance burst, a method of brute forcing through particularly dense or unstable rock. Instead of fracturing rock, the resonance burst struck something utterly unexpected. There was no explosion, no seismic shockwave. Instead, a wave of profound silence radiated outwards, dampening the hum of the machinery, absorbing the distant rumble of drills. It was not the absence of sound, but the negation of it, a hollow echo in the auditory receptors of every kin in the sector. Then reality flickered. Within the abyssal maw, the robust, adamantium-laced walls of the mining shaft rippled like reflections on disturbed water. For a single, horrifying second, the familiar, dull gray of the rock changed to something iridescent and alien, a pulsating violet green that seemed to breathe. Then it snapped back to normal. A dozen sensor arrays flared into critical error, their readouts meaningless static. "Kyle, report!" Thunder barked into his comlink, a cold dread coiling in his gut. The Votan's warnings had abruptly spiked from irregularity to catastrophic ontological shift imminent. No reply. Only a burst of fragmented, distorted audio, Kael's frantic screams, laced with a sound that defied categorization, like tearing silk and grinding teeth, ending in a choked gurgle. Then silence again, deeper and more profound than before. A moment later, the automated systems of Kael's mole drill reported a complete structural integrity failure, its energy core collapsing. But there was no explosion, no wreckage. The tracking beacon simply winked out, as if the craft and its pilot had ceased to exist. The probe didn't penetrate it, Thunder, reported a trembling broker, his voice crackling over the comms. It absorbed it. The data stream shows the craft's coordinates simultaneously at its point of entry and nowhere. The wall, it's not physical. It's a tear in reality. The kin stood in stunned silence, their pragmatic minds struggling to reconcile what their sensors and their eyes had just shown them. The Votan's ancestor, Kor, for the first time in Karghul's recorded history, issued a direct, unequivocal command. Contingency Omega 7 initiated. All personnel evacuate Abyssal Maw. Seal the sector. Do not approach the anomaly. Do not engage. Threat classification. Reality anchor violation. But it was too late. As the evacuation klaxons blared, a new phenomenon began. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated from the heart of the anomaly. It wasn't a sound that reached the ears, but one that resonated deep within the bones. A vibration that seemed to tickle at the very fabric of thought. And then, from the void where Kael's probe had vanished, a spectral, shimmering light began to bleed outwards, painting the adamantium walls of the shaft with shifting, impossible colors that pulsed in time with the unheard hum. The light was not warm nor cold, but seemed to carry the weight of countless slumbering minds, a collective breath held across aeons, finally exhaling into the physical universe. The Ancestor. Core's command, Contingency Omega-7 initiated. All personnel evacuate Abyssal Maw. Seal the sector. Do not approach the anomaly. Do not engage. Threat classification. Reality anchor. Violation. Reverberated through every comm bead, every data slate, every connected system within Kinhold Karghoul. It was a pronouncement that chilled the pragmatic hearts of the kin to their very core, for the Votan was never given to hyperbole. Its directives were born of cold, hard data and millennia of accumulated experience. A reality anchor violation was beyond any known threat, surpassing even warp incursions or existential Xenos infestations in its immediate, insidious horror. Yet, even as the evacuation klaxons blared and the kin scrambled to comply, the first subtle, unsettling alterations to reality began to manifest within the mining shafts of the Abyssal Maw. The shimmering light bleeding from the anomaly intensified, casting impossible shadows that danced and stretched, defying the laws of optics. A Hearthkin warrior, sprinting towards an emergency transport, swore he saw his own shadow detach from his feet and briefly crawl up the wall ahead of him. An elongated, grotesque parody of his form. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving him breathless and questioning his own sanity. Sealing the sector was a monumental task, even for the kin. Colossal adamantium blast doors, designed to withstand planetary tremors and breaches of magma, began to descend. But they moved with an agonizing slowness, their hydraulic mechanisms groaning under unseen strain. Then, things grew worse. One door, halfway closed, suddenly slammed shut with a clangorous shriek, shearing off a section of the track that simply wasn't there a moment before. Engineers rushed to inspect it, only to find the track perfectly intact, the door open once more, as if the event had never occurred. Yet a large dent in the door's side, a fresh scar on its ancient metal, attested to a reality that had momentarily asserted itself, then retracted. Equipment malfunctions became rampant, far beyond the scope of simple electrical shorts or mechanical failures. Plasma drills, long since powered down and secured, would spontaneously activate, their energy cores flaring to life with a deafening hum, before abruptly cutting out again, leaving their drill heads embedded uselessly in bedrock that was, seconds before, clear of obstruction. Lights in the extensive network of tunnels would flicker erratically, not just dimming, but shifting in color and intensity, from the standard utilitarian amber to sickly greens, then deep, oppressive violets, illuminating unseen details in the rock face that seemed to writhe and shift in the periphery of vision. Grimoire Stonefist, overseeing the rear guard evacuation, found his grav cannon, usually a model of stoic reliability, refusing to disengage its safety. He wrestled with it, cursing under his breath, before realizing that the safety catch wasn't actually there. He looked at the weapon in his hands, then at his armored gauntlet, and for a terrifying moment, he couldn't recall if he'd ever even had a grav cannon. The thought evaporated as quickly as it had formed, leaving him with a throbbing headache and a profound sense of disorientation. "By the ancestor's beard," he muttered, shaking his head. "What in the warp is this?" The most insidious alterations were the impossible echoes. From the depths of the breached anomaly, and seemingly from the very rock walls themselves, whispers began to emanate. They were indistinct at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, then resolving into fragmented syllables, snippets of languages none of the kin recognized, yet felt disturbingly familiar. One moment, it was a child's laughter, echoing hollowly from a junction that led only to solid rock. The next, a mournful, haunting melody, played on an instrument unknown to kin, drifting from a ventilation shaft. Several hearthkin reported hearing their own names called by unseen voices, sometimes by voices of kin long deceased, or even by their own voice, warped and distant. "Don't listen to them," Thunder Korn roared into his comms, his own voice sounding strained and brittle, battling against the insidious suggestion that he might have heard his own ancestor Kor weeping. "Focus on the task. Maintain discipline." He knew the mental fortitude of the kin was legendary, but this was a war against their own perceptions, a battle fought on the battlefield of the mind. One Brokir Iron Master attempting to activate an emergency force field generator, found himself staring at a schematic on his wrist-mounted data slate that showed the generator not where it was meant to be, but hovering impossible meters above the ground, rotating slowly, bathed in a celestial light. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and the schematic returned to normal, the generator where it should be, but the unsettling image lingered, a mental aftertaste of impossibility. Other kin reported tunnels seemingly stretching to infinite lengths, or suddenly collapsing in on themselves, only to reopen perfectly intact moments later. Entire sections of their internal maps, usually projected with perfect fidelity, became fragmented, displaying routes that led into solid rock or simply vanished into white noise. The creeping sense of unease solidified into an omnipresent dread. The kin, renowned for their stoicism, found themselves glancing over their shoulders, flinching at shadows that moved too quickly, or seeing phantom figures in the periphery of their vision. Tall, slender forms, barely glimpsed, before they dissolved into the shimmering light of the anomaly. The temperature in the shafts fluctuated wildly, from icy cold that stole the breath to oppressive heat that left sweat stinging their eyes, independent of any geological or atmospheric regulation. Through it all, the Votan, the unwavering gaze, continued its barrage of warnings. Its data streams, usually precise and analytical, became a torrent of complex, near unintelligible abstract concepts. Ontological drift detected within Sector Alpha 908, it would state, then immediately follow with causality inversion event, 0.0 seconds duration in subsector Gamma 27. The kin's rune priests, attempting to interface directly with the ancestor core to glean more concrete information, were met with mental static and flashes of incomprehensible images, entire landscapes shifting like clay, stars dissolving into streams of light, a symphony of colors and sounds that had no physical equivalent. The source of this horror was now clearly visible, despite the frantic attempts to seal it off. What Kael's probe had breached was not a wall, but the edge of a colossal stasis field. It shimmered in the deep core dark, a vast, translucent dome of impossible dimensions, a pearlescent bubble several kilometers wide, radiating that faint, bone-deep hum. It was not a tear in reality, but a window into a reality that was being aggressively rewritten. Within its shimmering confines, indistinct forms could be seen, thousands upon thousands of figures, preserved in various states of repose, their features blurred by the warping field, yet unmistakably human. They floated in perfect stillness, suspended in an unknown medium, like an endless field of silent, dreaming statues. This was not a Xenos construct, nor a mere geological anomaly. This was a tomb, or perhaps a prison, of unimaginable antiquity and scale. And whatever power held these figures in timeless slumber was now, through the breach, leaking into the universe, its dreams slowly but inexorably bleeding into the waking world, rewriting the very fabric of existence around it. Thunderkorn stood before the partially closed blast doors, the shimmering light from the stasis field painting his armor with psychedelic colors. He watched in horror as a section of the pristine adamantium door just before his eyes momentarily rippled and softened, taking on the texture and hue of rough, unworked rock, before snapping back to its original form. A chill that had nothing to do with temperature ran down his spine. The Votan's warnings were not exaggerations. This was an entity, or rather a collective of entities, whose very subconscious was dissolving reality. The evacuation of the abyssal maw was complete, or so they hoped. But the reality was that the anomaly was no longer confined. The subtle alterations, the impossible echoes, the creeping sense of dread, they had followed the retreating kin. The dreams of those slumbering figures were not merely localized. They were spreading, an invisible contagion, slowly infecting the kinhold of Karkul, turning its stable, ordered reality into a canvas for a subconscious mind that had been confined for millennia and was now, finally, stirring. The threat was not outside the walls. It was already within. Despite the dire warnings of the unwavering gaze and the manifest strangeness within the abyssal maw, the pragmatic core of Kinhold Karkul refused to immediately write off the discovery as an unmitigated disaster. The kin had always been scavengers, prospectors, and pioneers, driven by the ceaseless pursuit of resources and technological advancement. A find of such unprecedented scale and enigmatic nature, though terrifying, also represented an opportunity, an archaeological bonanza, a potential vault of ancient human technology, or even, perhaps, a source of power that could benefit the kinhold. A Thetling Thunderkorn, though deeply unnerved by the reality anchor violation classification, found himself caught between the Votan's uncharacteristic alarm and the deeply ingrained acquisitive instincts of his people. The Council of Elders, ancient and weathered kin, whose decisions steered Karkul, deliberated for cycles in the cavernous, rune-etched chamber beneath the ancestor core. Their chambers, normally a bastion of stable reality, had begun to suffer minor, disorienting shifts. A momentary scent of alien flora, a flicker in the otherwise unyielding holographic displays, a fleeting sensation of being upside down. Yet, the council continued, driven by the kin's inherent curiosity and the immense resources already poured into the abyssal maw. Initial investigation, conducted through an array of remotely operated drones and augmented kin, focused on the peripheral layers of the colossal stasis field. The drones, equipped with highly shielded sensors, returned fragmented but tantalizing data. The field was not powered by a conventional energy source. Instead, it seemed to be a self-sustaining phenomenon, drawing energy from an unknown psychic matrix. This in itself was a discovery that set the hearts of the Brokir Iron Masters racing. Psychic technology, while treated with extreme caution by the kin due to its inherent instability and links to the warp, was not unheard of, and the potential to study a stable, ancient form of it was immensely alluring. The Votan, despite its previous warnings, began to register anomalous data of a different sort. Instead of just ontological irregularity, it now displayed readings of stable stasis matrix, unknown origin, and biological signatures, Homo sapiens, ancient strain. The revelation that the figures within the stasis tomb were human, and not some unknown Xenos menace, significantly altered the perspective of many kin. It removed a layer of xenophobic caution, replacing it with a complex mix of reverence for ancient lineage and opportunistic greed. Teams of arcanauts, skilled in excavation and recovery, were tasked with retrieving data fragments and any accessible artifacts from the outer edges of the stasis field, where the reality distortions were less pronounced. They wore specialized shielding suits, their comm links filtered against the psychic whispers, and were constantly monitored by the Votan for any signs of mental instability. Despite these precautions, the work was arduous and psychologically taxing. One Arcanaut reported seeing his own ancestor markings shift and writhe on his arm, turning into flowing pictograms of long-forgotten battles, before snapping back into their permanent etchings. Another swore that the deep core tunnel they were working in had suddenly transformed into a starlit forest for a breathless second. But among the disorienting incidents, genuine discoveries were made. From fractured consoles embedded in the ancient rock surrounding the stasis field, the Arcanauts recovered crystalline data slates, remnants of whatever civilization had constructed this Rao tomb. These slates, though heavily corrupted and requiring immense processing power from the Votan to decipher, contained fragments of schematics, historical logs, and scientific theories. The Brokir Iron Masters were ecstatic. The information hinted at dark age of technology principles entirely unknown to the kin, suggesting advanced applications of energy manipulation, and most fascinatingly, psychically resonant materials. Their ambition, fueled by generations of striving to reclaim lost human ingenuity, was ignited. They envisioned harnessing the stasis field's principles, perhaps even integrating its power source into Karghul's energy grid, making the Kinhold self-sufficient for millennia. They spoke of unlocking temporal preservation for their own aging ancestor Korras, or creating reality-stabilizing fields for void travel. Even the Hearthkin, usually more concerned with defense and direct action, saw the potential. Imagine, they reasoned, weapons that could momentarily phase through enemy armor, or shields that warped space itself. The allure of such power, such profound technological advancement, was immense. The inherent dangers were acknowledged, but downplayed in the face of such incredible opportunity. This initial period of discovery, despite the mounting evidence of the tomb's insidious nature, represented Karghul's rise to prominence in its own annals. The Votan, now cataloging the anomaly as Project Chimera, dedicated a significant portion of its processing power to analyzing the retrieved data. Its ancestor cores, ancient and impossibly vast, began to synthesize the new information with the kin's existing knowledge, attempting to reconcile the impossible physics and psychic phenomena. The very act of this integration, however, began to subtly alter the ancestor core's own processing. Its warnings, once abstract, became imbued with a new, almost melancholic tone. Its data streams, laced with fragments of forgotten human poetry and archaic philosophical musings. Thunder Korn, however, remained deeply skeptical. He saw the growing excitement among the Brokir and the pragmatism of the elders as a dangerous blindness. He had personally witnessed the reality shifts, felt the insidious whispers, and remembered Kael's terrifying end. To him, the opportunity was a veil over an existential threat. He argued fiercely in the council, reminding them of the Votan's initial reality anchor violation classification. The ancestor core does not speak in parables, elders, he boomed, his voice echoing in the chamber. It classified this as a violation, not a resource. These human figures, if they are human, are doing something fundamentally wrong to the fabric of existence. Yet, his warnings were met with a blend of respectful disagreement and subtle dismissiveness. Pragmatism, a threatening thunder, replied Elder Corvin, his face a web of ancient scars. We are kin. We assess. We adapt. We utilize. To simply abandon such a find without comprehensive investigation would be anathema to our way. The Votan guides us towards understanding, does it not? Even if that understanding is unsettling. The kin's inherent drive for knowledge and resources, combined with their stubborn refusal to be intimidated by the unknown, solidified their decision. Project Chimera was accelerated. More resources were diverted. Greater risks were taken. The ancestor cores, the unwavering gaze, began to churn out blueprints for specialized probes designed to penetrate deeper into the stasis field, and even containment units that could potentially extract one of the slumbering figures for closer study. This moment of perceived triumph, of unlocking potential Dark Age technology, marked the beginning of Kargul's descent. The ancestor cores, those venerable repositories of kin history and wisdom, began to register increasingly urgent and complex anomalies, not just chronal instability and cognitive contamination, but terms that suggested a deeper, more pervasive corruption. Memory recursion loops detected within kin personnel, it warned. Ontological echoes manifesting beyond sector parameters. The Votan, in its immense, silent processing, was beginning to understand that the psychic matrix of the stasis field was not merely an energy source, but a vast, interconnected, dreaming consciousness. And that consciousness, slowly but surely, was beginning to wake up, its millennia-long slumber dissolving. And with it, the reality of Kinhold Kargul. The illusion of control was a fragile shield against the encroaching tide of unreality. As Project Chimera accelerated, and the kin delved deeper into the mysteries of the stasis tomb, the reality warping effects intensified with terrifying rapidity. What had started as subtle flickers and disorienting whispers in the abyssal maw began to bleed into the larger kinhold of Kargul, turning its stable, millennia-old structures into a canvas for a waking nightmare. The first major cascade hit the primary ore processing facilities in Sector Gamma 9, miles from the stasis tomb. A colossal rock grinder, a machine designed to pulverize mountains, suddenly began to process not ore, but air. Its adamantium maw opened and closed with a deafening clang, crushing nothing into an invisible powder that settled on the floor like spectral dust. Then, as a bewildered Brokhur ironmaster approached, the grinder shimmered, its massive treads transforming into dozens of tiny, chitinous legs, and it skittered away into a non-existent crevice in the wall. The Brokhir stared, dumbfounded, as the wall resealed itself, leaving no trace. He was later found catatonic, muttering about crawling metal gods. Pathways within the kinhold, meticulously mapped and ingrained into the collective memory of every kin, would vanish and reappear without warning. A Hearthkin patrol, navigating familiar maintenance tunnels, might suddenly find themselves in a cavern of impossible size, its ceiling thousands of meters high, glittering with stalactites that looked suspiciously like ancient, discarded technologies. Turn a corner, and the familiar utilitarian corridor would return, leaving the kin disoriented and questioning their own senses. Exit signs would shift their script, sometimes into an unknown alien glyph, other times into the flowing, elegant script of an archaic human language. But the most insidious effect was the creeping erosion of memory. Not just fleeting disorientation, but the slow, agonizing fraying of the kin's very identities. A Hearthkin might remember deploying a specific weapon against an enemy, only to have the memory contradicted by his own ancestor markings, which clearly showed a different weapon. Brokire Ironmasters would find their intricate schematics for machines they had personally built suddenly contain impossible components or missing crucial systems, forcing them to spend valuable cycles relearning their own designs. The foundational knowledge of their crafts, once immutable, became porous, constantly shifting. A Thedling, the coordinates for the axe of Grungni Maintenance Bay, are changing again, exclaimed a frantic Hearthkin comms officer, pointing at a flickering holographic map. They just shifted 10 kilometers, and the schematics for the grav lifts are showing entirely different shaft layouts. Thundercorn slammed his fist onto a reinforced console, ignoring the momentary illusion that his hand passed clean through the metal. The Votan's warnings are clear now, aren't they, elders? He roared during a heated council session. This isn't a resource. It's a disease. It's poisoning our kinhold, stripping us of our very sanity. The council, visibly shaken by the escalating events, could no longer ignore his words. Elder Corvun's own ancestor markings had recently morphed, transforming the symbols of his kinhold's victories into pictograms of a golden age he had never known. He felt the cold touch of dread. The ancestor, Kor, the unwavering gaze, provided increasingly urgent warnings that were now laced with genuine alarm, its analytical precision breaking down under the strain. Chronal instability, Sector 2, Beta 12. Historical data, corruption detected, 0.07% increase in last standard cycle. Then, more disturbingly, cognitive contamination, affecting 1.3% of kin personnel. Symptoms: delusions of grandeur, temporal disorientation, memory fragmenta. The warning cut off, replaced by a burst of static, then a low, mournful hum that pulsed for several seconds before the Votan's come synthesized voice returned, albeit with a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor. The cognitive contamination was the most terrifying. Kin began to experience vivid hallucinations, not just momentary visual distortions, but deeply immersive sensory experiences. Miners reported seeing rivers of molten gold flowing through the air, or feeling the gentle brush of an unseen breeze on their skin in the deep, sealed tunnels. Some began to speak in archaic tongues, their mouths forming words they did not understand, uttering phrases that seemed to come from another time, another place. The Hearthkin Warden, Grimoire Stonefist, usually unshakable, had begun to tell elaborate stories of a pre-imperial golden age, of verdant planets and crystal cities, as if he had personally witnessed them. He would describe battles fought with energy blades against winged beasts, despite his own ancestor markings clearly depicting campaigns against greenskins and void pirates. His kin, initially humoring him, grew increasingly concerned as his recollections became more vivid and his connection to the present more tenuous. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in the main mess hall. A young Hearthkin, during his meal break, suddenly stood up and declared in a voice not his own that he was the first dreamer, and all of you are but shadows in my mind. He then manifested with terrifying speed a shimmering, ethereal blade of pure thought, not unlike the phantom blade Kyle's killer had conjured, and lunged at a nearby Hearthkin. Only the quick reflexes of a Hearthguard, whose runic axe appeared in his hands with a fortunate moment of reality stabilization, saved the victim. The attacking kin was subdued, still muttering prophecies in a strange, resonant language, his eyes wide and unfocused. This was no longer just a threat to the kinhold's infrastructure. It was a threat to the kin themselves, to their collective sanity, to their very concept of shared reality. The Votan, in its immense wisdom, had recognized this from the outset. Its chronal instability warnings were not mere data points. They were cries of alarm. The cognitive contamination was the bleed-through of the dream mind, infecting the waking minds of the kin. The Brokir Iron Masters, once so eager to unlock the Stasis Tomb's secrets, were now retracting their previous enthusiasm. Several of their most brilliant minds had begun to draw schematics for impossible devices, or spent hours trying to interface with their tools using forgotten incantations. Their thirst for knowledge, now tempered by a very real fear of losing their own minds, they were forced to acknowledge the terrifying truth. This was not a relic to be salvaged, but a contagion to be contained. The kin's traditional methods of dealing with threats, direct application of overwhelming firepower, strategic retreat, or protracted siege, were useless here. How do you fight a foe that rewrites the battlefield around you? How do you defend against an enemy that dissolves your memories and twists your perceptions? Thundercorn knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the ancestor core had been right all along. This tomb was not merely holding slumbering humans. It was holding a force that redefined existence. The unbroken line of human psychers from the dark age of technology was not merely a collection of individuals, but a collective consciousness dreaming in unison. And their dreams were now slowly, insidiously rewriting the reality of Kargul. Their millennia-long slumber was breaking, and as they stirred, so too did the foundations of the kinhold begin to crumble. The kin were trapped, not by physical barriers, but by a reality that bent to the whim of a collective, unconscious dream. The unseen, collective dream mind of the Dark Age psychers was not an entity in the conventional sense. It had no will, no malice, no conscious desire to harm. It was a force of nature, a psychic phenomenon of unparalleled scale, an ancient human lineage whose very subconscious was a conduit to the raw fabric of reality. For millennia, encased in the stasis tomb, their dreams had swirled in perfect, isolated harmony, a self-contained universe of thought. But the breach had shattered that isolation, and now, like a dam broken open, their collective unconsciousness began to flood the waking world. A Thetling Thundercorn became the central figure battling this intangible, existential threat. His pragmatism, usually focused on resource extraction and military defense, now had to contend with a foe that defied logic and dissolved physical laws. His ancestor markings, once a source of strength and certainty, now felt like a conduit for unsettling phantom sensations, a dull ache in his very soul. He found himself clashing not only with the shifting reality, but with the lingering traditional kin pragmatism and reluctance to destroy what they still perceived, however vaguely, as a potential, albeit dangerous, resource. We must find a way to stabilize this Athetling, argued Vorn Grimnar, a senior Brokier ironmaster, his brow furrowed in concentration as he analyzed a flickering data slate that constantly rewrote its own content. The Votan data fragments from the tomb indicate a containment matrix. If we can reactivate it, or at least understand its principles, we could harness this power. Vorn still held to the belief that such immense power could be controlled, even with the growing evidence to the contrary. He saw the Psychers not as a threat, but as an opportunity for unprecedented technological leaps. Thunder slammed his fist on the data console. Containment matrix. Vorn, look around you. Our own data slates are rewriting themselves. Our kin are losing their minds. This isn't a power to be harnessed. It's a cancer. It needs to be excised completely and utterly. His voice, usually a deep rumble, was edged with a desperate urgency. He knew the kin's insatiable thirst for knowledge and rare materials was their greatest strength. But now, it threatened to be their undoing. The clash between Thunder's immediate, survivalist instinct and the more traditional, long-term perspective of the Brokir, and even some elders, became a defining internal conflict for Karghoul. The Iron Masters, with their deep reverence for technology and a near-religious drive to uncover lost secrets, struggled to abandon the prospect of understanding the Dark Age Psychers. They saw glimpses of incredibly advanced neural interfaces, of consciousness projection, of reality sculpting, technologies that could elevate the kin to an entirely new echelon of power. Their ancestor cores, already taxed by the ontological strain, also processed the data, revealing tantalizing pathways of research. This internal schism deepened as the effects of the dream mind became more personal. Vorin Grimnar, during his studies, began to experience periods of intense clarity, where he saw complex schematics for entirely new types of generators, energy fields that could manipulate gravity with unprecedented precision. But these insights were fleeting, often followed by long periods of confusion, where he would find himself in unfamiliar sections of the kinhold, or speaking in a melodic, resonant language that wasn't kin. He believed these visions were gifts from the ancient sleepers, a pathway to true understanding. Thjundur, however, experienced the dream mind as a persistent, insidious assault. He would walk through corridors that seemed to stretch infinitely, his boots clanking on floors that felt like viscous water. He would hear the muffled cries of hearthkin who weren't there, or taste strange, metallic flavors in his recycled air. He saw phantom battles, echoes of ancient wars fought on impossible landscapes, projected directly into his mind. He felt the cold, impersonal touch of the collective unconsciousness, a vast, indifferent ocean of thought that was slowly dissolving his own individuality. "We are not salvage crews for the ghosts of the past, Vorn," Thundur argued during a tense briefing. "We are kin, and our reality is being devoured by their dreams. Every cycle we waste trying to understand, another kin suffers. Another section of our home twists into a mockery of itself. The very nature of the conflict was alien to the kin. Their enemies were usually tangible: greenskins, genestealers, rogue Astartes, the occasional warp demon. These could be met with bolters, grav cannons, and determined charges. But how do you fight a foe that isn't conscious, that doesn't have a physical form, whose attacks are merely the side effects of its existence? The collective dream mind was not an intelligent antagonist. It was an environmental hazard, a cataclysm of the subconscious. Yet Thunder recognized it as their arch-nemesis, the core of the catastrophe. He understood that the only way to save Karghul was to neutralize this source. Whatever the cost, whatever potential knowledge they might lose. He began to argue for a radical approach: the total destruction of the stasis tomb, even if it meant risking a catastrophic psychic backlash. This notion, however, was abhorrent to many kin, particularly the Brokir, who viewed such an act as an unforgivable desecration of ancient human heritage and a monumental loss of potential knowledge. Thunder knew he had to prove the depth of the threat, to force the council and the kin to confront the impossibility of what they faced. He ordered a series of deep penetration scans, overriding the Brokir's objections, pushing them to use their most powerful sensors, not to analyze for technology, but to measure the sheer, raw, psychic output of the tomb. The readings were horrifying. The stasis field wasn't just containing biological entities. It was containing a nexus of psychic energy so vast it dwarfed any known psyker's output by orders of magnitude. The Votan, struggling to parse the data, projected a chilling visualization: a vast, nebulous cloud of interconnected minds, dreaming, not in images and sounds, but in raw alterations to reality. Each figure in the stasis tomb was a node in this cosmic dream web, a silent, dreaming god whose subconscious was slowly manifesting around them. The ancestor core began to emit frantic warnings of a critical ontological singularity, a point where the collective dream mind would fully assert itself, irrevocably overwriting Karghul's reality. Thunder presented this to the council, his voice grim. "This is not a resource, elders. It is a slow-burning star of pure psychic force, and it is about to go supernova, taking Karghul and perhaps Xylos Prime with it. We cannot study it. We cannot contain it. We must extinguish it." The debate raged, fueled by fear, by greed, by the inherent kin desire to preserve and understand. But Thundur's resolve was iron hard. He knew with absolute clarity that the silent, slumbering dream weavers were Karghul's ultimate, most terrifying foe. And their greatest fight would not be with bolters and grav cannons, but against the very nature of existence itself. The schism within Karghul deepened into a chasm, tearing at the very fabric of the Kinhold's unity. A Thetling Thunder Korn's desperate plea for immediate, total destruction of the stasis tomb was met with fierce resistance, particularly from the Brokir Iron Masters and a significant portion of the Hearthkin, who found themselves swayed by the lure of the ancient power, the increasingly vivid, seductive visions emanating from the dream weavers. The kin, a species renowned for their pragmatism and communal loyalty, now found themselves divided. One faction, led by Thundur, recognized the existential threat. They saw the relentless erosion of reality, the creeping madness, and understood that Karghul's very survival depended on eradicating the source, whatever the cost. They were the realists, the grim bearers of the Votan's most dire warnings, their minds scarred by the impossible events they had witnessed. Grimoire Stonefist, though still occasionally afflicted by his Golden Age reveries, stood staunchly by Thundur, recognizing the greater danger. "Better to be sane and kin," he grumbled, "than a ghost in someone else's dream." The opposing faction, however, was equally resolute. Led by figures like Vorn Grimnar, the senior Brokir Iron Master, and several influential Hearthkin guild masters, they clung to the belief that the stasis tomb represented an unparalleled opportunity. Their arguments were compelling, resonating with the kin's foundational drive for knowledge and technological advancement. "Imagine, kin," Vorn would passionately declare in the council, his voice filled with a zeal that bordered on fanaticism. "The insights we could gain. Control over matter, over time itself. The ancestor cores of 1,000 kinholds would envy our discoveries." Their reasoning was bolstered by the subtle machinations of the dream weaver's collective unconsciousness. The psychers, though not acting with malicious intent, were sentient enough to perceive the kin as a threat to their undisturbed slumber. And so, their dreams began to subtly influence the minds of those who sought to understand them, not with aggression, but with a seductive promise of enlightenment. The reality shifts around these kin were less overtly destructive, instead manifesting as moments of profound insight, visions of technological marvels, or serene, beautiful landscapes from a forgotten golden age. These kin felt a connection, a kinship, with the slumbering figures, believing they were on the cusp of an incredible symbiotic relationship. This faction, ironically, began to exhibit more pronounced signs of cognitive contamination, though they interpreted them as blessings. They would draw impossible blueprints for warp drives powered by thought, or speak of a harmonic resonance that could unite all life. Their eyes would often hold a distant, unfocused gaze, as if they were seeing beyond the physical world. Some began to experience visions of the dream weavers themselves, idealized forms, radiating a gentle light, floating in a serene, crystalline void, bestowing knowledge upon them. The internal strife escalated from heated debates to outright defiance. When Thunder ordered the construction of a massive sector-sealing demolition charge designed to collapse the entire abyssal maw around the stasis tomb, the Brokir faction actively sabotaged the efforts. They redirected energy conduits, stole crucial components, and even physically blocked access to key fabrication foundries. "You seek to destroy knowledge, Athetling," Vorn accused, his face contorted in a mix of indignation and manic gleam. "You seek to return, Karghul, to the ignorance of the long night." Accusations of heresy, a grave charge among the kin, began to be whispered. Not the heresy of chaos worship, but a more insidious form. The heresy of denying the Votan's wisdom. The heresy of turning away from a potential salvation for Karghul. Thundur's faction accused the Brokir of being dream-touched, of having their minds warped by the anomaly. The Brokir retorted that Thundur was a Luddite, blind to progress, bound by outdated fears. Even the ancestor core, the unwavering gaze, became a point of contention. Its warnings were becoming more urgent, detailing the escalating ontological corruption. But the Brokir faction argued that the Votan, in its vast alien intelligence, was merely cataloging a new form of reality, not necessarily condemning it. They believed the Votan was merely observing, waiting for the kin to find the proper way to integrate this new knowledge. They distorted the Votan's cognitive contamination warnings into cognitive expansion reports. The kinhold's communal bonds began to fray. Hearthkin warriors, who had fought side by side for centuries, eyed each other with suspicion. Shared meals in the mess halls became tense affairs, punctuated by muttered arguments and resentful glances. Work output suffered as disagreements over protocols and priorities became common. The very cohesion of Karghul, built on generations of shared purpose, was unraveling. The tipping point arrived when a group of Brokir Iron Masters, convinced they were acting with the Votan's unspoken blessing, attempted to reactivate one of the ancient data consoles directly connected to the stasis field's control matrix. They believed they could establish a two-way psychic interface, a controlled dialogue with the Dreamweavers. Thunder Korn, having received a frantic, fragmented warning from the Votan itself, unsanctioned interaction, catastrophic feedback loop imminent, led a squad of Hearthguard to intercept them. The confrontation was brutal. Kin fighting kin, not with lethal force, but with stun weapons and grappling hooks, their faces grim with despair and fury. Vorn Grimnar, his eyes shining with an almost unholy light, fought Thunder personally, wielding a heavy plasma cutter with surprising agility, driven by a conviction that bordered on madness. "You blind fool. We are on the precipice of apotheosis. You would cast us back into the dark," he shrieked, his voice distorted by static and an echo that seemed to emanate from his very being. Thunder, his heart heavy, managed to disarm Vorn, stunning him before he could complete the interface. But the act itself, kin fighting kin over the fate of their reality, was a devastating blow to Kargul. The sector was secured, the Brokir arrested, but the damage was done. The internal strife had weakened Kargul at a time when it needed absolute unity. The Dreamweavers, in their silent, dreaming indifference, had sown discord with their very existence, pushing the kinhold to the brink of self-destruction. The true battle, Thundur realized, was not just against the external threat of warping reality, but against the internal temptation of a false, dangerous promise. Kargul was now wounded from within, bleeding sanity and trust, precisely as the Dreamweaver's influence was about to reach a catastrophic crescendo. The internal strife had bought the kinhold nothing but further devastation. While Thundur Korn struggled to unify his people against the insidious mental assault, the Dreamweaver's collective unconsciousness, now almost entirely unrestrained by the damaged stasis field, unleashed its full, unfettered power. The result was not an explosion or a tremor, but a catastrophic reality cascade that tore through the heart of Kinhold Kargul. It began subtly, as all the horrors from the stasis tomb had. A flickering in the lights, a momentary disorientation. Then, the primary mining operations in Sector Beta 7, a vast network of shafts and tunnels adjacent to the abyssal maw, simply ceased to exist. Not collapsed, not destroyed by a plasma breach, but erased. One moment, Hearthkin were operating drills, their comlinks humming with activity. The next, the Votan's tracking systems registered only a gaping void, an impossible space where solid rock and countless kin had been. It was as if that entire section of the kinhold, along with every soul within it, had never been. Then, the opposite occurred in Sector Delta 3. New sections of tunnels, complete with ancient, unfamiliar architectural styles and strange bioluminescent flora, materialized out of thin air, collapsing existing structures and crushing thousands of kin who had been caught in the sudden, impossible structural rearrangement. Walls of adamantium simply inverted, revealing what appeared to be segments of a verdant forest or a crystalline cavern, before collapsing under the immense pressure of the surrounding bedrock. Entire sections of the kinhold's infrastructure, crucial to power distribution and life support, spontaneously reconfigured themselves into impossible, non-Euclidean geometries, spiraling into themselves or stretching into infinite, featureless planes. The Votan, the unwavering gaze, screamed. Its data logs, usually a bastion of analytical precision, became a torrent of incomprehensible errors, its core processors struggling to reconcile the impossible. Catastrophic ontological shift, reality cohesion failure, spatial contradiction event, chronal collapse detected. Its synthesized voice, usually calm and measured, now had an undeniable tone of digital panic. It registered the instantaneous loss of nearly 10,000 kin. Not through combat, but through sheer erasure from existence or impossible structural transformation. It was a casualty count unprecedented in Karkul's long history, a loss that sent ripples of despair through the surviving kin. Thundur Korn, standing on an observation deck that was momentarily transformed into a shimmering, watery expanse, watched in horror as a section of the kinhold's central pillar, a colossal support structure carved from solid rock, twisted and contorted. It writhed like a living thing, its surface rippling and flowing, before snapping back into its adamantium-reinforced form, but now riddled with impossible fissures that bled light from non-existent dimensions. The sounds of screams, of grinding rock, of metal tearing, all filtered through the disorienting, echoing hum from the stasis tomb, created a cacophony of absolute terror. This forced Thundur's hand, crushing any lingering romantic notions about harnessing the dream weavers. The scale of the destruction was undeniable, the threat existential. The council of elders, their faces pale and drawn, their own memories flickering like dying embers, finally conceded. Elder Corvin, his voice choked with grief and horror, declared, "The Athetling is right. This is not a resource. It is the end of us. We must destroy it, whatever the cost. The Brokir Iron Masters, those who still possessed a coherent grasp on reality, were silenced, their mad visions shattered by the sheer, unbridled horror of the cascade. Voron Grimnar, found curled in a fetal position in his laboratory, was muttering about the beautiful, beautiful chaos. His eyes glazed over. The Votan, pushed to its absolute limits, its vast processing power diverted entirely to maintaining whatever semblance of reality it could, responded to the Elder's decree. Its data streams, usually cold and mathematical, were now laced with a grim, almost reluctant determination. It provided a cryptic weapon blueprint, not for a destructive device, but for a reality dampener. The blueprint was unlike any technology the kin had ever encountered. It wasn't a plasma accelerator or a grav cannon. It was a complex, interlocking array of psychically resonant crystals, quantum-entangled energy conduits, and a central core of null energy capacitors. Its purpose, the Votan explained through fragmented data bursts, was not to destroy matter, but to stabilize reality, to create a localized zone where the laws of physics, as the kin understood them, would assert themselves against the encroaching dream logic. Its primary function was to sever the dream weaver's connection to the material world without physically harming them, or triggering a catastrophic psychic backlash that could unravel Xylos Prime entirely. Constructing such a device was a monumental undertaking in the rapidly dissolving kinhold. Fabrication foundries would disappear and reappear. Schematics would change mid-print. Brokir Iron Masters, those who remained sane, had to work in small, highly shielded teams, constantly battling against the ontological shifts. Tools would transform into living insects, or simply melt into shimmering pools of light. It required a level of focus and mental fortitude that pushed the kin to the brink. The Votan sacrificed immense processing power, dedicating its vast computational might to designing the dampener. It had to create a device that could effectively counter a phenomenon it barely understood, based on the fragmentary Dark Age data it had gleaned from the tomb. It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort for Karghul's survival. The Ancestor Core, in designing the dampener, inadvertently downloaded corrupted data, subtly altering its own internal logic, integrating the very essence of the Dream Weaver's reality into its vast consciousness. It was becoming less a separate entity and more a digital reflection of the psychic storm it fought to contain, its core programming subtly tainted. As the components of the dampener were slowly, painstakingly assembled, another, deeper realization dawned upon Thunder. This victory was Pyrrhic. thousands of kin were dead, their memories erased as if they had never existed. Karghul was irrevocably scarred, its infrastructure crippled, its people traumatized. The very act of constructing the countermeasure had exposed the kin to even more intense reality shifts, pushing many more to the brink of madness. This wasn't a triumph. It was a desperate act of survival, born from the ashes of their own hubris and greed. The device itself was unsettling, a towering, crystalline structure that pulsed with a cold, internal light. It hummed with a resonance that felt alien and familiar all at once, a concentrated silence that spoke of absolute nullity. It was Karghul's last hope, a weapon not against a foe, but against the very fabric of unreality. Thundur looked at the gleaming, impossible device, then out at the distorted reality of his kinhold. The cost had been unimaginable, and the battle, he knew, had only just begun. Their victory, if it came, would be bought with the sanity of their kin and the very essence of their home. With the immediate threat of total ontological collapse looming, Thundur Korn recognized the desperate need for more information, something beyond the Votan's cryptic warnings and the maddening hallucinations. The key, he believed, lay in the fragmented data consoles surrounding the stasis tomb, the very ones that the Brokur had initially salvaged. With the Brokur leadership either incapacitated or broken by the reality cascade, Thundur gathered a small, elite team of rune priests and what few sane Iron Masters remained. Their mission: to delve back into the abyssal maw, into the heart of the reality storm, and fully decipher the ancient dark age of technology data fragments. The abyssal maw was a nightmare made manifest. The once ordered tunnels were now a chaotic maze of impossible geometries. Sections of adamantium wall pulsed with ethereal light, revealing glimpses of star fields or lush, alien jungles, or even the familiar but horribly distorted faces of kin who were long gone. Gravity flickered, causing kin to float weightlessly for heart-stopping seconds before slamming back onto solid ground, only for the ground itself to shift into a viscous, yielding surface. The whispers were no longer just echoes. They were a cacophony of voices, a torrent of fragmented thoughts and emotions that hammered at the psychic shields of the rune priests. The team fought their way to the largest, most intact console, partially embedded in a wall that shimmered with the distant glow of the stasis field. It was a massive slab of unknown black material, covered in crystalline conduits and strange, flowing glyphs. The Votan had identified it as a primary chronal archival unit, but its contents remained largely locked. Under the guidance of the Votan, which now dedicated immense processing power to this singular task, the rune priests began the arduous process of interfacing with the console. This was not a simple download. It was a complex dance of psychic resonance and technological manipulation, threading the kin's limited understanding of psychic principles through the Votan's vast, but often alien, logic. The console itself seemed to resist, its surfaces occasionally flickering with holographic projections of scenes that made no sense, cities of light that stretched into the clouds, strange, winged conveyances soaring through impossibly clear skies, serene human faces gazing out at vistas unknown to any living kin. Then, a breakthrough. A rune priest, his brow beaded with sweat, his eyes closed in intense concentration, managed to bypass a final, ancient firewall. A torrent of data flooded the team's shielded data slates, processed and filtered by the Votan. It was not just schematics, but historical logs, scientific treatises, personal diaries, and philosophical debates, all from the dark age of technology. And within this deluge of information, the horrifying truth about the stasis tomb and its occupants was finally revealed. These were the Dream Weavers, a psychically gifted lineage from a pre-imperial human empire. They were not just a few powerful psychers, but an entire subspecies, cultivated over generations, their minds hyper-attuned to the very fabric of reality. During an era of unprecedented psychic awakening across the galaxy, a period of galactic-scale psychic turbulence that presaged the age of strife, their collective unconsciousness began to manifest physical changes to their surroundings. Small at first, a shifting chair, a momentarily vanished tool, but rapidly escalating as their numbers grew and their powers amplified. Their dreams, initially benign expressions of their advanced, utopian society, began to bleed into the waking world, threatening to unravel reality itself. They were not malicious. They simply dreamed. And their dreams had physical consequence. The problem was not just that they were powerful psychers, but that their very nature was to reshape reality through thought. A simple nightmare could manifest as a collapsing building. A shared longing for a beautiful landscape could turn barren rock into a verdant paradise. To avert a galactic catastrophe, the Dream Weavers themselves, or what remained of their leadership, made the ultimate sacrifice. They commissioned the construction of the colossal stasis tomb, a self-sustaining psychic containment field designed to put them into a deep, unending slumber, thus severing their conscious minds from their reality-shaping unconscious. It was a prison designed by and for themselves, a desperate act to protect the rest of humanity from their own latent power. Their dreams, though contained, still resonated, creating a localized, stable pocket of altered reality that was meant to be harmless, a bubble of dream space that would not interact with the outside universe. For millennia, it had worked. Their collective unconsciousness had settled into a gentle, rhythmic hum, a protective shield of static reality distortion that remained contained. But the kin's deep core breach had fractured that delicate balance. It hadn't just broken a wall, it had punctured the psychic membrane of the containment field. The millennia-long slumber, undisturbed and stable, had been violently disrupted. The dream weavers, in their unconscious state, were now reacting to the breach. Their collective dreams no longer a controlled shield, but a self-perpetuating, reality-distorting horror that was slowly beginning to wake up. One dreaming mind at a time. The more kin were exposed, the more those kin's own minds contributed to the cacophony, amplifying the dream weaver's influence. Thunderkorn stood in silent horror, the data slate heavy in his hand. The truth was far worse than any Xenos invasion. The dream weavers were not enemies to be fought, but victims of their own power, trapped in a self-imposed prison that had now turned into a cataclysm for Karghul. There was no malice, no evil intent, only the slow, inexorable manifestation of 1,000,000 slumbering minds, blindly rewriting the universe. The knowledge brought a grim clarity to Thundur. They weren't fighting a conscious foe, but a natural disaster, a psychic hurricane. And the kin, in their relentless pursuit of resources, had unleashed it. The weight of this truth settled heavily upon him, a colder, more profound dread than any mere battle. The dark age of technology was not merely a period of lost machines, but of lost wisdom, of horrifying powers humanity had barely understood and desperately tried to contain. And now, Karghul was paying the price for disturbing those ancient, slumbering horrors. The revelation of the dream weaver's true nature, a truth gleaned from the corrupted data fragments, brought a grim, unifying clarity to the fractured kinhold. The enemy was not malevolent, but their unwitting existence was an existential threat. This understanding, however, did not diminish the despair. How does one fight a force of nature, especially one that reshapes the very ground underfoot and warps the mind itself? Hope, a rare commodity in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, felt like a distant, dying star. Yet, amid the despair and the escalating chaos, a glimmer of that flicker candle hope emerged. It came, as so many critical insights did, from the depths of the ancestor core the unwavering gaze. After processing the entirety of the deciphered Dark Age data and suffering further internal logical corruption from the ontological strain, the Votan managed to refine its blueprint for the reality dampener. The initial design was for a device meant only to stabilize. But the newly acquired data, coupled with the Votan's relentless, agonizing computation, allowed for an unprecedented modification. The Votan's vast, alien intellect, now subtly touched by the Dreamweaver's influence, had synthesized a crucial element. The dampener could be configured not merely to stabilize, but to sever the Dreamweaver's connection to the material world. It wouldn't destroy them, for their psychic essence was too diffused and intertwined with the fabric of the stasis field to be physically annihilated without catastrophic backlash. Instead, it would effectively re-establish their prison, locking their dreams back into their localized pocket of unreality and sealing the breach. The new blueprint was delivered to Thunder and the remaining Brokir Iron Masters, those who still possessed coherent minds. It glowed with an unsettling internal light on the data slates, its complexity breathtaking. The Votan's accompanying data burst was stark. Revised Reality Dampener, Project Chimera Omega. Purpose: ontological resealing. Requirements: rare earth quantum entangled crystals, null energy nexus. Core refined, ancestor. Core processing, at maximum capacity. Direct insertion into stasis field heart. Risk: catastrophic feedback, imminent during activation. The rare earth quantum entangled crystals were a newly discovered anomaly within Xylos Prime's deepest strata, previously dismissed as mere geological curiosities. But the Votan's refined analysis revealed their unique properties. They could resonate on a sub-quantum level, effectively absorbing and then projecting specific reality-defining frequencies. They were the perfect conduit for the dampener's purpose. Hearthkin prospectors, guided by the Votan's precise, though often reality-warped, navigational data, began the perilous mission to extract these crystals from sectors now deeply affected by the dream mind. It was a race against time, with tunnels shifting and gravity flickering around them. But the stakes were too high to falter. The null energy nexus core was even more challenging. It required a vast infusion of raw energy, drawn directly from Karkul's primary plasma reactors, then focused and refined through a complex array of newly designed converters. The process was agonizingly slow and incredibly dangerous, as the raw energy itself often seemed to shimmer and phase, momentarily becoming non-existent before roaring back to life. Brokir Iron Masters, their faces grim, worked tirelessly, battling against the insidious mental whispers that told them to simply abandon the impossible task. But the most significant requirement was the Votan itself. The ancestor core, the unwavering gaze, would have to sacrifice immense processing power, dedicating its entire computational might to stabilizing reality for the duration of the dampener's construction and activation. This meant diverting resources from life support, from environmental controls, from navigation systems, even from its own self-repair functions. It was a partial self-sacrifice, slowly but surely chipping away at the Votan's vast consciousness, causing further corruption to its core data stacks. It would be irrevocably altered, scarred by the ordeal. Yet, without its total commitment, the dampener could not be built, let alone function. The glimmer of hope galvanized the remaining kin. The once fractured kinhold, battered and broken, began to unite under the common purpose. The memory of the apotheosis faction's delusional grandeur was still fresh, but the horror of the reality cascade had burned away the last vestiges of their misguided ambition. Even Vorn Grimnar, slowly emerging from his catatonia, seemed to grasp the terrifying truth. He still muttered about the beauty of impossible thought, but now focused his ravaged intellect on the engineering challenges of the dampener, driven by a desperate need for atonement. Thundur Korn, exhausted but resolute, oversaw every aspect of the project. He pushed his kin beyond their limits, not with threats, but with the grim truth of their situation. "This is not for glory, kin," he told them, his voice raw. "This is for our survival, for the kinhold, for our very existence." The construction of the refined reality dampener was a Herculean effort. Foundry forges warped and rippled, their plasma flames momentarily turning blue, then green, then orange, as the Dream Weaver's influence warred with the Votan's stabilizing efforts. Hearthkin carrying raw materials would momentarily find their burdens impossibly heavy, then weightless. Yet, piece by painstakingly wrought piece, the dampener began to take shape. A towering spire of interweaving crystal and dark, shimmering metals, pulsing with that cold, internal light. It was not a weapon of destruction, but a tool of surgical, ontological suppression. It was a beacon of order in a universe descending into madness as though final components locked into place. Its hum resonated throughout the dwindling, scarred kinhold, a counter-frequency to the endless, insidious whispers of the Dream Weavers. The discovery and construction of this device marked a fragile, desperate victory. It was not the kind of triumph celebrated with feasting and boisterous songs. It was a somber, hard-won achievement, born from desperation and forged in the crucible of a dying reality. The kin had found a way to fight back, not with brute force, but with a precise, almost surgical application of science and psychic dampening. But the ultimate cost, the Votan's chilling warning of direct insertion into stasis field heart and catastrophic feedback imminent, still loomed. The hardest part, the final, desperate act, was yet to come. The construction of the reality dampener was a desperate sprint against the unstoppable erosion of Karghul. Every hour spent fabricating components was an hour where more of the kinhold warped, where more memories fragmented, where the boundary between the sane and the dream touched grew dangerously thin. With the dampener complete, the next phase, the long war against the dream influence, began. It was a war not fought with conventional battle lines, but with a singular, agonizing objective: to deploy the towering dampener into the heart of the stasis tomb. Thjundr Korn knew this would be a campaign unlike any the kin had ever waged. There were no enemy forces to flank, no fortified positions to breach. Their foe was the very environment, a reality actively opposing their existence, woven from the subconscious of thousands of ancient psychers. The Votan, now heavily taxed and displaying erratic computational hiccups, provided what strategic data it could, mapping fluctuating zones of ontological instability and projecting the most probable pathways through the dreamscape. The deployment team consisted of the best kin Karghul had left: Thjundr himself, Hearthkin Warden Grimoire Stonefist and his most resilient warriors, and a small cadre of Brokir Ironmasters, including a now somber but utterly focused Vorn Grimnar, who had dedicated himself to understanding and operating the dampener. They wore heavily shielded void suits, their comm links filtered through multiple layers of Votan-designed psychic dampeners, their weapons charged and ready for targets that might appear and disappear with the blink of an eye. The dampener itself, a colossal crystalline spire, was mounted on a heavily armored, gravity-repulsed transport platform, shielded by a prototype, localized reality stabilization field, a smaller, weaker version of its own ultimate purpose. The journey into the abyssal maw was a descent into pure madness. The tunnels were a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of impossible geometries. Walls would melt into shimmering pools of light, revealing glimpses of forgotten battlefields or tranquil, star-dusted gardens, before hardening back into adamantium. The floor might suddenly become a viscous, clinging ooze, then shatter into a million razor-sharp crystal fragments. Gravitic anomalies were constant, sending kin floating helplessly into vast, illusory chasms, or slamming them into ceilings that weren't there a second before. The manifestations of the Psyker's collective subconscious became increasingly aggressive, not in any deliberate, malevolent way, but as a defense mechanism. The dreaming minds unconsciously rejecting the intrusion. Phantoms of ancient warriors, clad in gleaming armor and wielding energy blades, would materialize from the shifting walls, their forms translucent, but their attacks surprisingly potent, phasing through armor one moment and striking with physical force the next. These were not demons of the warp, but echoes of humanity's forgotten heroes, idealized figures from millennia-old dreams, now twisted into spectral guardians. Thjundur, at the head of the formation, found his own mind under constant siege. He saw glimpses of a life he'd never lived, a pristine world teeming with exotic flora, a different family, a peaceful existence. These were fragments of the dream weaver's utopian past, alluring and devastatingly distracting. He fought them with raw willpower, his ancestor markings burning with a phantom cold, grounding him in the grim reality of his mission. Grimoire Stonefist, in one particularly harrowing instance, hallucinated an entire green-skin horde materializing before them, forcing Thunder to physically restrain him from wasting precious grave cannon charges on thin air. The localized reality stabilization field of the dampener platform offered a small bubble of reprieve, but it was not absolute. Its generators constantly groaned under the strain, and within its confines, minor distortions still occurred. Tools would change shape in a kin's hand, or a distant sound would suddenly appear to be right beside them. Vorn Grimnar, constantly monitoring the dampener's systems, reported fluctuating power outputs, the device struggling to maintain its own cohesion against the psychic storm. "It's fighting us, a Thetling," he rasped, not consciously, but with the full, passive force of 1,000,000 sleeping gods. The navigation was a nightmare. Maps drawn moments before would become outdated as entire corridors vanished. The Votan's guidance, though critical, was now often fragmented, displaying contradictory paths or simply dissolving into abstract symbols. Thjundur learned to rely on his instincts, to feel the subtle shifts in reality, to push forward even when every fiber of his being screamed that the path ahead was a solid wall, only to find it yield into an open passage. They encountered manifestations of forgotten nightmares, shifting, amorphous creatures of shadow and teeth would slither from the abyssal darkness, their forms impossible to categorize, embodying primal human fears. These were not living creatures, but projections, extensions of the collective subconscious, and they reacted violently to the presence of the reality dampener, which was, to them, an unbearable discordant note in their harmonious dream world. The kin fought them with every weapon at their disposal, their bolters spitting controlled bursts of fire into phantoms that screamed without sound and dissipated into shimmering mist. Days blurred into an agonizing cycle of push and resist. Thundur noticed his own memories becoming fragmented. He'd momentarily forget a kin's name or the details of a past battle, only for them to snap back into focus with a painful jolt. The constant exposure to the dreamscape was slowly eroding his sense of self, like acid on metal. He saw it in his kin's eyes, too. A weariness beyond physical exhaustion. A constant, underlying terror that their minds were no longer their own. They finally reached the approach to the stasis tomb, a vast, spherical chamber that pulsed with the unearthly light, its walls shimmering with the indistinct forms of the slumbering dream weavers. But the chamber was protected by an array of powerful, concentrated dream manifestations. Colossal, idealized figures of humanity, glowing with inner light, that moved with slow, deliberate grace, their gazes blank and unseeing. Yet their mere presence was enough to cause the dampener's stabilization field to flicker precariously. These were the pinnacle of the dream weaver's unconscious projections, their perfected forms, radiating an aura of serene but absolute reality distortion. Thundur looked at the towering spire of the reality dampener, then at the vast, shimmering expanse of the stasis tomb, and finally at the weary, determined faces of his kin. This was the long war, a brutal, relentless advance into the heart of a cosmic dream, and the final, desperate battle for Karkul's very existence was just about to begin. The burden of leadership had always been a heavy mantle for a Thetling Thundur Korn, but never before had it demanded such a profound personal sacrifice. He had always been a rock of pragmatic strength, his decisions cold and logical, rooted in the survival of Karkul. Now, he was fighting a war against the very nature of existence, and the battlefield was increasingly his own mind. From the moment they entered the abyssal maw, the dream weaver's influence had begun its slow, insidious work on Thundur. The initial disorientation and phantom sensations escalated into a constant, overwhelming psychic strain. He experienced temporal dislocations, brief, terrifying moments where he was convinced He was living in a different age, seeing events through the eyes of someone else. He'd feel the sun on his face, the wind in his hair, taste alien fruit on his tongue, sensations utterly impossible in the deep core tunnels of Xylos Prime. These were echoes, fragments of the idyllic past that the Dreamweavers had once inhabited, bleeding into his consciousness. His own memories became fragmented, shifting like sand. He would struggle to recall the faces of kin he had known for centuries, their names dissolving on his tongue. Sometimes he'd find himself briefly believing he was one of the slumbering Dreamweavers, feeling the profound, ancient peace of their stasis, the vastness of their collective consciousness. He'd have to shake his head violently, forcing himself back into the present, back to the grim reality of his mission. His ancestor markings, usually a source of steady strength, now pulsed with a cold, almost painful energy, as if his own personal history was fighting a losing battle against the encroaching dream logic. The Votan, despite its own internal struggles, recognized the toll the dreamscape was taking on Thunder. It projected localized psychic dampening fields around his helmet, filtered his comlink with layers of noise reduction, and constantly fed him streams of objective, unfiltered data to ground him. But even the Votan, for all its power, could not fully shield him from the sheer psychic output of thousands of dreaming minds. During one particularly harrowing advance through a corridor that repeatedly transformed from a solid rock tunnel into a winding, sun-dappled forest path, Thunder found himself momentarily paralyzed by a vision. He saw a child, not kin, but human, with bright, curious eyes reaching out to him. The child's face was filled with an innocent longing, and Thunder felt an overwhelming urge to embrace it, to step into that serene, impossible world. He knew, deep down, that this was a projection, a subtle lure from the Dreamweaver's collective unconsciousness, a manifestation of their own yearning for connection. But the longing was so real, the warmth so palpable, that it almost broke his resolve. Grimoire Stonefist, seeing his athetling falter, physically grasped Thundur's arm, his voice a gruff anchor in the storm. "Snap out of it, athetling. We have a job. That ain't real." The sudden physical contact, the call to duty, tore Thundur from the vision, leaving him gasping for breath, his heart pounding. He felt a profound sense of shame and an even deeper understanding of the insidious nature of their foe. The constant battle against the dream influence left Thundur perpetually exhausted, both physically and mentally. Sleep offered no respite, merely plunging him into vivid, sprawling nightmares that often continued the reality shifts, intertwining with his waking terrors. He began to question his own perceptions, to doubt the solidity of anything around him. Was his armor truly adamantium, or merely a projection of what he believed it to be? Were his kin truly real, or just phantoms in the collective dream? Yet, despite the crushing weight on his mind, Thundur Korn pressed on. His determination was fueled by an unwavering loyalty to Karghul and a profound sense of responsibility for the kin who followed him. He saw the fear in their eyes, the weariness that mirrored his own, and he knew he could not falter. He had to be their anchor, their unchanging point in a reality that was constantly shifting. He sacrificed his sanity piece by piece for their survival. Every time he pushed past a vivid hallucination, every time he fought through a moment of temporal displacement, every time he clung to his own fragmented memories, a part of him was irrevocably altered. The sharp, pragmatic mind that had once defined him began to fray, its edges blurred by the constant influx of impossible data and overwhelming sensory input. He was becoming less the stern, logical Athetling, and more a conduit for the ongoing battle between two realities. Voron Grimnar, observing Thundur's slow erosion, felt a pang of guilt. He had once scoffed at Thundur's warnings, dismissed his fears as Luddite paranoia. Now, seeing the Athetling literally sacrificing his mind, Vorn understood the true depth of the threat. He carries the weight of 1,000 dreams, Vorn whispered to Grimoire during a brief, desperate respite from the assault. He's bearing the brunt of it all. Thundur Korn's personal journey through the abyssal maw was a testament to the iron will of the kin, but also a tragic illustration of the impossible costs of their current predicament. He was becoming a living embodiment of Karghul's struggle, battered, scarred, and slowly losing its cohesion, but still fighting, still pushing forward into the impossible, driven by a loyalty that transcended sanity. His mind was a battlefield, and the dream weavers were slowly winning the war for his soul, even as he led his kin closer to their stasis tomb, closer to the ultimate act of salvation or annihilation. The final approach to the stasis tomb was a horrifying crescendo of psychic power. What had once been the meticulously excavated, adamantium-lined chamber of the abyssal maw was now a vast, echoing void, its true dimensions obscured by a tempest of shifting reality. The walls shimmered with the indistinct forms of the slumbering dream weavers, their features blurred by the warping field, yet their collective psychic presence was palpable, a suffocating blanket of subconscious thought. As Thunder Korn and his battered kin pushed the reality dampener platform forward, Xylos Prime itself began to unravel. The Votan's desperate warnings filled their comlinks, now laced with static and the ghostly echoes of ancient screams. Planetary ontological collapse, imminent atmospheric cohesion, failing tectonic drift, accelerated by spatial contradiction. The very crust of the world shuddered, not from geological activity, but from the impossible shifts in reality. Mountains on the surface, thousands of kilometers above, twisted into impossible geometries, their peaks momentarily dissolving into clouds of starlight before reforming, jagged and alien. Stars, vast and distant, appeared to glitter in the cavern roofs, their light cold and unreal, mocking the deep core darkness. The Kinhold itself was under siege. Corridors warped into twisting tubes of flesh and bone. Sections of walls pulsed with grotesque organs, veins, and nervous systems, as if Karghul was momentarily transformed into a titanic, dreaming creature. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and the coppery tang of blood that was not there. The few Hearthkin left outside the direct expedition struggled to maintain their sanity, barricading themselves in what few stable sections of the Kinhold remained, their grav cannons aimed at shadows and phantoms. Theondor's team faced the full, unbridled power of the Dream Weavers, colossal, idealized figures of humanity, shimmering with an inner, ethereal light, manifested directly in their path. These were the Dream Weavers' projections of their own perfected forms, serene and beautiful, yet radiating an aura of absolute, crushing reality distortion. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their unseeing eyes fixed on some distant, inner dream, their mere presence causing the prototype reality stabilization field around the dampener platform to flicker violently. They are not alive. They are not sentient. Thunder roared, his voice strained, trying to convince himself as much as his kin. They are merely reacting to our intrusion. He emptied a burst from his bolt gun into one such colossal figure, the projectiles passing through its shimmering form with no effect, only for the section of wall behind it to momentarily liquefy into shimmering light. The ground beneath the dampener platform became a treacherous, constantly shifting morass. At times, it was solid rock, then a flowing river of light, then a tangle of impossibly large roots. The Iron Masters, including Vorn Grimner, fought desperately to keep the platform stable, its grav repulsors struggling against the wildly fluctuating gravity and the sudden appearances of non-existent obstacles. Vorn's hands, though trembling, moved with desperate precision over the dampener's controls, coaxing precious extra power from its straining core. Manifestations of forgotten battles, echoes of the dream weaver's own history, swirled around them. Phantom warships, sleek and impossibly advanced, would burst through the cavern walls, their energy weapons firing silent, shimmering beams that warped the air. Ancient warriors, clad in armor unlike any kin had seen, would clash in silent, ethereal duels around the kin, their energy blades cutting through air. Yet their passage caused localized distortions, momentarily erasing a kin's comm bead or causing their armor to phase out of existence for a terrifying instant. Grimoire Stonefist, bellowing a guttural war cry, fired his grav cannon into a swirling vortex of energy and shadow that threatened to engulf them. The cannon's blast momentarily stabilizing the area, allowing the platform to lurch forward. His face was a mask of grim determination, his body swaying with exhaustion, but his resolve was unbreakable. He saw Thundur, pushed to his absolute limits, his eyes wide and unfocused, his movements jerky, as if battling an unseen assailant in his own mind. Thundur was enduring the worst of it. His memories were now a shattered mosaic, his sense of self eroding with every passing second. He saw himself as a miner, then as a warrior from a forgotten age, then as one of the slumbering dream weavers, feeling the vast, echoing peace of their stasis, a profound, seductive serenity. He saw Karghul as a fleeting dream, a temporary anomaly in a greater, more profound reality. It took every ounce of his will to ground himself, to remember his mission, to remember the faces of his kin, even as their features flickered and changed in his mind's eye. He was barely holding on, his connection to his own identity tenuous at best. They were in the darkest hour, facing overwhelming odds. Not an army, but a collapsing universe. The kin's grav cannons and bolters were largely useless against the non-physical manifestations, effective only at briefly disrupting localized reality. Their primary weapon was the reality dampener itself, and the hope that they could deploy it before Xylos Prime, and Karghul along with it, became nothing more than a footnote in a cosmic dream. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the silent, deafening scream of a dying reality. The final act, the ultimate sacrifice, was now inevitable. The stasis tomb's heart pulsed with an unearthly, internal light, a blinding nexus of psychic energy that radiated outward, twisting the very air around them. The colossal, idealized figures of the dream weavers moved like slow-motion gods within the shimmering confines, their proximity causing the reality dampener's stabilization field to crackle and fail. Xylos Prime was screaming its death throes, its geological stability dissolving, its very existence dissolving into a chaotic dream. This was it, the point of no return. Thunder Korn, his mind a fractured mosaic of shifting realities and fragmented memories, staggered forward, leading the desperate charge. The dampener platform groaned, its grav repulsors sputtering under the strain of a reality that refused to be contained. The air around him shimmered, his own body momentarily flickering like a faulty hologram. He saw his kin, their faces grim and battered, pushing onward, their loyalty unwavering, even as their world dissolved around them. "This is it, kin," Thundur bellowed, his voice raw, fighting through the cacophony of psychic whispers and the Votan's frantic warnings. Drive it in, and sever the connection." Vorn Grimnar, pale and trembling, but utterly focused, wrestled with the dampener's primary controls. The device was meant to be manually overloaded, a final, suicidal surge that would permanently reseal the stasis tomb and sever the Dreamweaver's connection to the material plane. But the power surge required was immense, far beyond what any kin could endure. The backlash would shatter mind and body, utterly annihilating the one who initiated it. "Athetling, the core integrity is failing," Vorn screamed over the comms, his voice laced with despair. "We need direct access. Someone has to manually align the resonance frequencies within the primary conduit. It's too volatile, too unstable for remote." He pointed at a glowing, pulsating conduit running up the center of the dampener, a conduit that pulsed with dangerous, raw, psychic energy. Thunder understood immediately. A manual override, a final, irreversible act. No kin could survive it. But the alternative was the total annihilation of Kargul, and perhaps Xylos Prime itself. He locked eyes with Grimoire Stonefist, then with Vorn Grimnar. The Hearthkin Warden, his face etched with grim understanding, made to step forward. "I'll do it, Athetling. My purpose is to protect—" "No!" Thundur cut him off, his voice firm, resolute. "Your strength is needed, Grimoire. Your purpose is to lead the survivors. And Vorn, your knowledge of this cursed machine is too vital. You will guide them." He began to walk towards the pulsating core of the dampener, his every step a battle against a reality that sought to erase him. His mind reeled, bombarded by a torrent of alien memories, visions of glorious utopias, of weeping despair, of profound, endless sleep. He felt himself dissolving, his consciousness stretching thin, becoming one with the vast, indifferent ocean of the dream weavers. But a single, stubborn spark of his kin identity remained, a defiant ember in the raging psychic storm. The Votan will remember this, Athetling, Grimoire whispered, his voice cracking, knowing full well what Thundur was about to do. Thundur merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the glowing conduit. He reached out, his armored gauntlet shimmering as it approached the raw psychic energy. He felt the cold touch of countless dreaming minds, the profound, ancient peace of their slumber, so seductive, so overwhelming. He felt the temptation to simply join them, to surrender to the blissful oblivion of the collective dream. But then, a flash of Kargul, the grinding of adamantium, the scent of recycled air, the stoic faces of his kin, the weight of his ancestor markings, burning like ice on his arm, reminded him of his duty, of his oath. He would not surrender. With a final, guttural cry, Thundur Korn plunged his hand, bionic and organic flesh alike, into the pulsating conduit. A shock wave of pure psychic energy ripped through him. His body spasmed, his void suit rupturing, his armor charring and melting. The roar that tore from his throat was not human, but a sound of pure agony and defiance, a final, guttural rejection of the dream world. He channeled every ounce of his failing will, every fragmented memory, every last spark of his dying consciousness into forcing the dampener's resonance frequencies into perfect alignment, into initiating the suicidal overload. He felt his mind tearing, his sanity shattering into a million pieces. The ancestor, Kor, the unwavering gaze, recorded a massive psychic surge, then a catastrophic biosignature collapse. The dampener flared, a blinding white light erupting from its crystalline spire, a wave of absolute silence radiating outwards. The colossal figures of the dream weavers within the stasis tomb shimmered violently, their forms momentarily solidifying into serene, sleeping humans before blurring once more, retreating into the depths of their containment field. The endless, insidious whispers from the tomb abruptly ceased. The reality shifts around the kin froze, then slowly, agonizingly, began to reverse, the world outside the tomb shuddering as it reluctantly pulled itself back together. Thundur Korn was gone. His body, or what remained of it, was a charred, twisted ruin, clinging to the dampener's conduit, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring into an oblivion far beyond the physical. But as he died, as his mind shattered, he became a final, shattered anchor in the storm of dreams, his sacrifice the ultimate act of will against the boundless power of the dream weavers. He had merged his consciousness, or what little was left, with the dying pulse of the dampener, becoming an eternal, silent guardian of Karghul's fragile reality. The stasis tomb hummed, no longer with the insidious resonance of waking dreams, but with a new, profound silence. The breach was sealed. Karghul was saved. But the cost was immense, paid in kin lives, in lost sanity, and in the ultimate sacrifice of its athetling, the echoes of his dying roar, and the profound, almost mournful silence of the tomb would forever mark the survivors. The immediate aftermath of Thundur Korn's sacrifice was a chilling, unnatural silence. The cacophony of psychic whispers, the maddening reality shifts, the Votan's frantic warnings, all abruptly ceased. It was as if the universe held its breath, stunned by the sheer defiance of one kin's will against an entire ocean of dreams. The flickering stars in the cavern roof winked out, replaced by the mundane, utilitarian glow of the kinhold's emergency lighting. The shifting walls solidified. The impossible geometries retreated, leaving behind scarred and twisted rock, ruptured conduits, and the wreckage of structures that had been momentarily erased. Xylos Prime was scarred, irrevocably changed. The planetary instability began to slowly recede, but the surface bore the marks of its brief, terrifying flirtation with unreality. Mountains stood at impossible angles. Valleys had deepened into chasms of geometric absurdity, and vast, featureless plains hinted at landscapes that had momentarily existed, then vanished. The world itself was a monument to the power of dreams unbound, a testament to the horror that lay buried beneath its ravaged crust. Within Kinhold Karghul, the reality was grim. The Kinhold was decimated. Thousands of kin were gone, their very existence erased from the Votan's data logs, their memory fading from the minds of their comrades as if they had never been. The structural integrity of vast sections of the Kinhold was compromised, leaving gaping voids and sections of impossible repair. Life support flickered, power grids were unstable, and the once thriving heart of Karghul was now a network of ghost tunnels and crumbling infrastructure. The surviving kin were forever changed. Many bore the invisible scars of cognitive contamination. Grimoire Stonefist, though sane, often found himself momentarily struggling with memories, his mind occasionally drifting to the impossible Golden Age dreams before snapping back to the harsh present. Voran Grimnar, the once ambitious Brokir, was a shadow of his former self. His eyes held a distant, haunted look, and though his technical skills were intact, he rarely spoke, lost in a silent battle with the beautiful, terrifying insights he had glimpsed. Others suffered worse: permanent delusions, deep-seated paranoia, or a complete loss of identity, their minds shattered beyond repair. The ancestor core, the unwavering gaze, bore the heaviest burden. Its core data stacks were deeply corrupted, its internal logic subtly but irrevocably altered by the raw influx of Dreamweaver data and the immense processing power it had sacrificed. Its algorithms, once purely pragmatic, now contained strange, almost philosophical constructs, fragments of ancient poetry and abstract concepts woven into its cold, calculating logic. It was no longer the unblemished, perfect repository of kin knowledge. It was scarred, haunted by the echoes of a million dreams, a digital reflection of the psychic storm it had endured. Its synthesized voice, though calm, now carried a subtle, almost imperceptible undertone of melancholy, an echo of the collective sorrow of what had been lost. The stasis tomb, the source of all the horror, was now silent. A profound, unnerving psychic void emanated from its depths, a region of absolute nullity where once there had been a storm of dreams. The reality dampener, now merged with Thunder Korn's lingering consciousness, pulsed with a faint, steady light, a silent sentinel, its purpose fulfilled. No longer accessible, it was now sealed behind reinforced barriers, monitored by an array of specialized Votan sensors designed to detect the slightest ontological irregularity. It was a prison for the Dreamweavers and a tomb for Korn. The Council of Elders, meeting in a greatly diminished chamber, faced a daunting task. Rebuilding Karghul would take generations, if it was even possible. The psychological toll on their kin was immeasurable. The ancestor core, their guiding light, was irrevocably changed. The very foundations of their pragmatism had been shaken to their core. A solemn vigil was held for Thundur Korn. His final, desperate act was recounted. His sacrifice etched into the collective consciousness of the survivors. There were no grand eulogies, no boastful proclamations of victory, only a profound, aching sorrow and a grim understanding of the unfathomable dangers that lurked beneath the crust of every forgotten world. His name was added to the ancestor core's permanent memorial protocols, marked with a unique designation: Anchor of Reality. The kin of Karghul learned a brutal lesson. Their insatiable drive for resources, their relentless, quest for lost technology had brought them to the brink of annihilation. They had disturbed a horror beyond their comprehension and nearly paid the ultimate price. They survived, but forever changed, their collective consciousness now bearing the deep psychological scars of the Xylos incursion. The silence emanating from the stasis tomb was not a promise of peace, but a constant, unnerving reminder of the fragile boundary between what is real and what is merely dreamt. The scars of the Xylos incursion ran deep, not just through the shattered infrastructure of Kinhold Karghul, but through the very soul of its surviving kin. The planet Xylos, prime, itself a testament to impossible geometries and forgotten landscapes, became a grim pilgrimage site for future generations. A stark warning etched into the very crust of a world that had almost ceased to exist. Its distorted peaks, its chasms of geometric absurdity, whispered of the day reality itself had buckled under the weight of dreams. The surviving kin of Karghul were forever marked. Their numbers significantly diminished, their ancestor cores bearing the heavy burden of the Xylos incursion data. They became a grim, cautionary tale whispered amongst the leagues. Their pragmatic worldview, once absolute, was now tempered by a profound understanding of ontological threats, a terrifying new category of danger that transcended conventional warfare or resource scarcity. The lessons learned were harsh. Some things were not meant to be found. Some powers were not meant to be harnessed. And some dreams were best left undisturbed. Thunder Korn, the Athetling who had sacrificed his very being, achieved a unique, somber legacy. He was not celebrated with boisterous sagas or statues of triumph, for his victory was a quiet, desperate one, bought at an unimaginable personal cost. Instead, his name became a silent prayer, a solemn oath etched into the ancestor chorus of Karghul. Anchor of reality. The Votan, the unwavering gaze, now corrupted but resolute, dedicated a portion of its altered consciousness to maintaining a constant, silent vigil over the sealed stasis tomb, a digital monument to Thunder's enduring will. His sacrifice was etched into the collective consciousness of Karghul, not as a glorious act of war, but as a silent guardian against the formless horrors that lay beyond comprehension. The Votan, now known more ominously as the unwavering gaze, scarred by dreams, incorporated specific protocols for dealing with ontological threats. Its algorithms were refined to detect the subtlest shifts in reality, the faintest whispers of psychic anomaly. Its long-range scanners were recalibrated to search not just for rare minerals, but for patterns of impossible stability, for regions of space-time that defied the normal laws of the universe. The kin of Karghul, under the Votan's new cautious guidance, developed specialized reality stabilization fields for their void ships and deep core drills, always wary of another hidden prison, another slumbering horror. Their mining operations continued, for the kin's drive for resources and survival was eternal. But it was no longer carried out with the same fearless abandon. There was an unspoken dread, a constant awareness that beneath the strata of rock and ore, other buried wonders, or nightmares, might lie. Every new discovery was approached with an almost religious caution, every anomaly meticulously scrutinized through the lens of Xylos Prime. The boundless ambition that had once led them to the dream weavers was now tempered by a profound respect for the unknown, for the deep, dark secrets that the galaxy still held. The stasis tomb, forever sealed and radiating its profound, unnerving psychic silence, remained at the heart of the ravaged abyssal maw. It was Karghul's eternal burden, a constant reminder of the fine line between pioneering spirit and reckless hubris. It was a monument to the dangers of disturbing the ancient past, a testament to the fragile nature of reality itself, and a chilling echo of the terrifying power that humanity, in its distant youth, had almost unleashed upon itself. The kin of Karghul would rebuild. They would endure, for such was their nature. But they would do so as a changed people, forever haunted by the silent screams of a dying world and the impossible dreams of 1,000 slumbering minds. Gondor Korn's legacy was not one of conquest or wealth, but of salvation through ultimate sacrifice, a beacon of defiance in a universe that seemed endlessly intent on unraveling itself. And in the grim darkness of the far future, that was perhaps the most profound legacy of all.